We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Now BBC Two discovers how the dedication and commitment of the NASA workers turned a mission impossible into the greatest week since creation, as man walked on the moon.
When President John F. Kennedy first committed America to landing a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s, it seemed impossible. But 8 years later, I found myself with the job of commanding the mission that would take the final step toward that great goal.
We have a liftoff, 32 minutes past the hour.
For the first time in mankind's long history, human beings would leave the confines of Earth and explore the surface of another planetary body.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. All your systems are looking good going around the corner. We'll
Stuff
see you
of science fiction would become fact. We were about to turn a timeless dream into reality. A reality that would be shared by countless millions of people watching back on Earth.
60 seconds. Forward. 30 seconds. Forward.
In the last 25 years, many people have wanted to know what it felt like. There's no easy answer to that. I can say that Buzz Aldrin, Mike Collins, and I were experienced, trained, and understood the risks involved. It was never going to be a simple or straightforward flight. And of course, there were moments which nothing could truly prepare us for. Anyway, we all know how it turned out. It was a remarkable chapter in the history of aviation and space exploration, and I was lucky to be a part of it.
The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
If I were to say, my fellow citizens, that we shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, and do all this, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first, before this decade is out, then we must be bold.
It was the eve of the launch of Apollo 11. Commander of the mission was Neil Armstrong, a 38-year-old civilian from a small Midwestern town. Considered to be reserved, introverted, and a brilliant test pilot, Armstrong would be first to set foot on the lunar surface.
Tomorrow, we, the crew of Apollo 11, are privileged to represent the United States in our first attempt to take man to another heavenly body.
Edwin Buzz Aldrin would descend with Armstrong to the moon. Aldrin was an intense high achiever, a fighter pilot who had flown 66 combat missions in Korea, a mathematician, and the only astronaut with a doctorate. Michael Collins was destined never to walk on the moon. As pilot of the command module, he would remain orbiting the moon until Armstrong and Aldrin returned. He knew that if anything happened on the lunar surface, he would have to come home alone.
I do have one complaint, however. I'd like to point out to those of you, particularly in the television business, that I have no TV set on board, and therefore I'm going to be one of the few Americans who's not going to be able to see the EVA, so I'd like you to save the tapes for me, please. I'd like to look at them after the flight.
I feel privileged to be alive with all of the other billions of people on this earth on this date when this huge thing is going on. In future generations, other races of people, other generations of people will look back to this summer and say, oh, how wonderful it must have been to have been alive then when this huge step, which ensures a victory over time and space and eternity for all of us, how wonderful to have been alive when that happened.
I remember coming into work that morning. There were 1 million to 2 million people in a 25-mile radius of the Space Center. People were lying in the streets. There was no more bread, no more milk, no groceries. Everyone that I'd ever heard of, I think I had about 20 visitors that showed up at my house because there was no place to stay. And I told my wife she had to take care of all 20 people because I was going to be gone for the next 24 hours. And so coming in, you begin to get the realization that something was getting ready to happen. It was momentous. I reflected as I came by early in the morning, the fact that all was swampland and farming land, and that used to be orange groves there, big. You looked at the pad, you saw the Saturn V out there, it was big. I began to reflect on the fact that we were getting ready to do something big.
Here we are on the 16th day of July, about to send 3 men to the moon, 2 to actually walk on it. It's difficult for any of us, really, to grasp this fantastic idea, but this date, July 16th, will be written in history that all men will know about from this day forward.
I remember the searchlights arced over the vehicle, looked like a cathedral. And all our checkouts had worked. In a strange way, would think of, Columbus' ship setting out from Spain, heading for a world he didn't know exactly what it was going to be like. But we were setting out on a new venture. We had done our preparations. The next step had to be taken. There was a question, could you land on the moon? We'd been near the moon, we'd been around it. But now, could you land on it? There were still unknowns. You knew you were facing unknowns.
The 3 suited up in the astronauts' quarters, ready to board the van for the 8-mile drive to the launch pad.
They take with them this morning the good wishes and the admiration of a world of people. As man, a species born and who's lived all his life on Earth, moves with this journey out into the solar system, and so, presumably, begins with this journey his dispersal in other places out in the universe.
I had a period of about maybe 30 minutes standing by myself on the launch tower, almost near the top, not quite to the spacecraft, but there wasn't another human being close at sight, and I could see the waves coming in, the sun slowly rising, and see the evidence, the parked cars of all the people out watching our launch 3, 5, 10 miles away, just millions of people. And it was quite a symbolic moment that I said to my, hey Buzz, you better remember this one.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We've just passed the 31-minute mark in our count. The T-minus 30 minutes, 52 seconds and counting. The lunar module on Apollo 11, of course, when it separates from the command module in lunar orbit, we'll have the call sign Eagle. Both Columbia and Eagle are go at this time at 29 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
It has to be over 100 degrees here in the broiling Florida sun where the VIPs, the very important persons, and indeed the VVIPs, the very, very important persons, are gathered to watch this launch just downrange. Among them here are former President Johnson, who helped to shape the space program as Senate Majority Leader, the new Vice President, Mr. Agnew, who has already stirred a controversy by suggesting that this administration commit itself to sending a man to Mars by the end of the century.
It was, by definition, the greatest story of the century. I was at the press site. There were at least 1,000 people there. Probably 500 of them were duly accredited, and the rest of them were hangers-on. Little old ladies, unclassified weirdos of one sort or another. A governor of one of our states and a rock star were there, hand in hand, watching it.
To say it was electric is a cliche. It was more than that. But it was exciting, it was absorbing, and everyone was caught up in the moment. And everyone thought that anything was doable, anything was possible. And it almost was.
There was a great sense of goodwill. There was not a whole lot of objectivity there. There was nobody there to criticize. They didn't want to criticize. They wanted to praise. They wanted to support. They wanted America to succeed. And so all the naysayers were true believers, and they wanted to be true believers.
And so, here at Cape Kennedy, we're all off to the moon this morning.
I'll say they're the bravest men in the world. And I think everybody in the world, the whole human population, should say a little prayer.
At this moment, millions of Frenchmen are glued to their television sets to watch the launching of Apollo 11.
But the war keeps no regular business hours, so there were plenty of soldiers up all night, watching for Viet Cong, but listening to the progress of Apollo 11.
At his summer residence at Castel Gandolfo, Pope Paul VI is following the Apollo 11 mission with intense personal interest.
The Pope recalled that as a boy, he read Jules Verne's book, From the Earth to the Moon. About the book, he said, that was the kingdom of fantasy, a prophetic fantasy perhaps, but gratuitous, unreal. Today, however, we are in the kingdom of reality.
We're now 14 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
A civil rights march, a mule train representing the poor and dispossessed, had made its way to the gates of Cape Kennedy to protest at the nation's priorities. NASA officials came out to meet them.
We walked across this field, which seemed to me to be a plain of battle, and the mule trains and the participants were coming toward us. And it seemed to be so out of character with all the technology that was around us.
The American government at that time had spent $24 billion on the exploration of outer space. $24 billion. Now, for the last 3 years, they had spent $3 billion. $3 billion would have fed every hungry person in America.
We are here to say that what we can do for space and exploration, we must do, and we demand that we do the very same for starving poor people.
We're now coming up on the 10-minute mark, 10 minutes away from our planned liftoff. Mark, T-minus 10 minutes and counting, T-minus 10. We're aiming for our planned liftoff at 32 minutes past the hour. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
If one tried to say how many pieces could go wrong, it's infinite, infinite. Whether it be on the ground or in a bird, and how many could cause catastrophe? A tremendous number.
Okay, Jules, we're getting close. We're getting close.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We passed the 6-minute mark in our countdown for Apollo 11. Now 5 minutes, 52 seconds and counting. Launch Director Rocco Petrone now gives the go. We're 5 minutes, 20 seconds and counting.
You're going through your final replenishment cycle, make sure you got the amount of fuel on board. You then start pressurizing, you start going through steps. leading right up to the moment of commitment, what I refer to as the moment of truth.
The vehicle starting to pressurize as far as the propellant tanks are concerned, and all is still go. Computer supervises hundreds of events occurring over these last few minutes. 2 minutes, 10 seconds, and counting. Oxidizer tanks in the second and third stages now have pressurized.
We had all these umbilical arms. We had like 10 different umbilical arms that weighed tons each. We're all linked to it.
The swing arm now coming back as our countdown continues. Skip Chauvin informing the astronauts that the swing arm now coming back.
And then all of a sudden, when all the arms were back, you realized that they were sitting there by themselves. The next closest person was at least 5 miles away, and they were sitting on millions of gallons of propellant.
Neil Armstrong reported back when he received the good wishes. Thank you very much. We know it will be a good flight.
I mean, there's no turning back once that rocket lifted off, and this was the moment, and it was getting very close to getting down to T-minus 0.
All the second stage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting. We are still go with Apollo 11. 30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
Most people base their thoughts of what a launch is like on what they see in the movies. The transition from being on the ground to actually in motion was so gentle that none of us really, other than hearing the count go to 0 and someone saying liftoff, and we could see the instruments begin to change, that would start to change at liftoff. Other than that, there wasn't a great physical sensation at all.
Flame still hitting the launcher, roughly 300 or so feet beneath it. And the vibration then hits the control center, and the windows start to shake. And great feeling, but also the apprehension is there. Yes, we had reached the moment that really the world had waited for.
Tower cleared.
There's really nothing to say about it. What can you say about a sight like that?
We got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading. Apollo 11 getting here good at 1 minute. Downrange 1 mile, altitude 4 miles now. Balance couple off. Greater down there. 1,000 feet high, 80 feet per second vertical rise.
And a minute or so after that unbelievable event, The astronauts are talking to the ground and reporting on the facts and figures of the flight. And somebody here a minute ago was saying they are as matter of fact and unexcited and calm as if they were taxicab drivers reporting in and saying we're on Maple Street headed for downtown.
11 Houston, you are go at 4 minutes.
With the spacecraft safely on its way, control of the flight passed from the launch team to mission control in Houston, Texas. For the next 8 days, the control room would run the mission in 3 teams.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. Trajectory and guidance look good, and the stage is good. Over. Apollo 11, Roger. 35,000 feet per second. Cut off.
Flight director of the white team was Gene Kranz, nicknamed by his controllers General Savage.
This was the world's greatest adventure, and we were participants in this thing. We were truly making it happen.
In the front of the control room, in what was known as the trench, sat Steve Bales. He was controller of navigation and guidance, Guido for short.
Even though we were young, 24, 25, 26, I was 26, we were the only experience anybody had in manned spaceflight, monitoring it. So people would come to the control center and say, what are all these kids doing here?
Stand by for mode 4 capability. Mode 4. Mark, mode 4 capability.
We were very well aware that we could change not only the course of missions, the course of our programs, but possibly the course of history through the decisions we made. And we were willing to do that.
Using the service propulsion system.
ADQ 602 up here.
Altitude is 100 miles, downrange 883 miles.
ADQ 602.
All communication between mission control and the Apollo 11 crew went through the capsule communicator, or Capcom. In this key role was Charlie Duke, himself an astronaut.
You know, the astronauts got the glory. They were the ones riding. They were the ones in the spacecraft. But without that team of people that was pyramided under them, you couldn't do it alone. There were 400,000 people supporting those 3 men going to the moon. And everybody had their job, and everybody had to do it correctly, or it wasn't going to work.
And ignition. 11 Houston, thrust is go. All engines, you're looking good. Hi, Roger, you're loud and clear.
Within a few minutes of leaving Earth, 97% of Apollo 11's huge mass had been shed.
We got skirt depth. Roger, we confirm skirt depth. Tower's gone. Roger, tower. Neil Armstrong confirming both the engine skirt separation and the launch escape tower separation. Yeah, Houston, Apollo 11 and Saturn gave us a magnificent ride. Roger, 11, we'll pass that on, and it certainly looks like you're well on your way now.
After 1.5 orbits of the Earth came a critical stage. The engine burned again for translunar injection to break Apollo 11 free of Earth's gravity and set it on course for the moon. For the astronauts, it was the point of no return. Their 3-day voyage to the moon had begun.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. Thrust is good. Everything's still looking good. Roger. 29,000 feet per second, building up toward.
As we were moving away from the Earth was the first opportunity that Neil and Mike had to look outside and see the Earth, and see the Earth getting smaller and smaller. And this was after we'd been established in a slow rotation of about 1 or 2 revolutions per minute, so that the heat from the sun would even out as the spacecraft turned around slowly. We'd see the Earth and the moon and the sun, one by one, move through the windows.
Just very low. We have not been able to visually pick up the Hawaiian island chain, but we can clearly see the United States, California, and Mexico down as far as Acapulco. It looks good on the monitor. But we have no intention of competing with the professionals, believe me. You'll never beat out the Thunderbird.
10 hours into the mission, and more than 60,000 miles from home, the crew began the first of their daily television transmissions from space.
We are very comfortable up here, though. We do have a happy home. There's plenty of room for the 3 of us.
The zero G is very comfortable, but after a while you get to the point where you sort of get tired of rattling around and banging off the ceiling and the floor and the side, so you tend to find a little corner somewhere and put your knees up or something like that to wedge yourself in, and that seems more at home. Roger.
Hey, that's a great shot right there. We see you in there. Guess that's Neil and Mike. Better be, anyway.
We had a TV show, and so the crew turned on the camera, and I'm sitting there watching on those big screens in Mission Control, and there's this, looked like the Earth to me, and I said to Buzz, he was holding the camera, I said, Buzz, that's a fantastic view of the Earth. It was sort of dead silence, and he said, Charlie, you're looking at the moon.
I was going to show you how you drink water out of a spoon, but I'm afraid I filled the spoon too full, and if I'm not careful, I'm going to spill water right over the sides. Can you see the water slopping around in the top of the spoon, kids? That's affirmative, 11. That really is water, though, I'll show you. And I'll show you, I hope, how easy it is to make some ham of zero G.
Astronauts and flight crew people always said, look, our job is not to be performers for the media. What do you want? You know, do you want us to be successful astronauts, or do you want us to be performers? And what we essentially, well, I'd never liked the word performers, we essentially said, you know, you've got two jobs. One is to do your job, and the other is to describe to the world and let the world understand what your job is. And also, you know, we constantly said the American people are paying for this, and they have a right to know how their money is being spent.
On each side, we have the two helmet visors. Okay, you did say this was going out now, didn't you?
11, you got a pretty big audience. It's live in the U.S., it's going live to Japan, Western Europe, and much of South America. Everybody reports very good color. Appreciate the great show.
As we pan back out to the distance at which we see the Earth, we'll have Apollo 11 signing off.
As the 19th of July began, the work of 500,000 people over 8 years was to be put to the test.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. I've got the morning news here if you're interested, over.
Yeah, we sure are. We're ready to copy and comment. Okay, looks like it's going to be impossible to get away from the fact that you guys are dominating all the news back here in Earth. Even Pravda in Russia is headlining the mission and calls Neil the czar of the ship. I think maybe they got the wrong mission.
The spacecraft is now about 1,000 miles from the moon. Jules, this is where it becomes very, very interesting, right?
Right, Frank. About 19 minutes from now, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins will fire up their big SPS, or Service Propulsion System engine, to slow Apollo 11 so that it's captured by the moon's gravity.
Delta VT.
It's a tricky time. Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins are on their own. Behind the moon, we can't hear them. Mission Control can't hear or see them.
00.
The approach had worked, but success depended on the lunar descent, and this is where the journey into the real unknown began.
001.
The excitement and the enthusiasm we all faced that day with, and that shift on the white team was remarkable. I had been in Mission Control many times before, but this was going to be a real unique event.
The actual descent was, to me, one of the most challenging periods of my life and my team's life.
Apollo 11 was now hugging the underside of the moon just 60 miles from the surface. The combined spaceship went behind the moon for the last time.
Plus 000 9 or 8. Plus, correction, 00572.
Houston has just told Apollo 11, we'll see you on the other side. They are not, as everybody knows by now, a very talkative crew. They said, we'll see you on the other side, and the response from Apollo 11 was, okay.
The last time they went around the moon, they would be gone for 40 minutes. The next time we saw them, we would have 15 minutes to check everything out, and then they were going to fire up that engine, and we were on our way to landing. About 10 minutes prior to acquisition of signal, I heard this announcement in the control center. It said, all flight controllers put on your headsets and come up on the spatial briefing loop. And we all came on a loop, and it was just quiet, silence. And then Gene Kranz comes on the loop, and he says, in 10 minutes, we're going to start something nobody's ever done before. He gave a speech after that General Patton would have liked to have given.
I knew no one could overhear us, and I proceeded to talk to the team very briefly about how proud I was of them, how proud I was of them as a team, and that no matter what happened on this particular day, I would be very proud of the way he performed.
And then he said something I think that meant more to me and everybody of the young flight control team than he could have possibly said. He said, but no matter what happens, I'm going to be behind you when we walk out of this room. And you're 26. You don't have a family here. You know, what would happen? Who's going to be behind you? Who's going to be with you? That meant a lot, really meant a lot.
Now we were going to terminate our conversation on this loop, and we were going to go to the moon.
Okay, let's go there, Capcom on the hot fire. Okay, all flight controllers going around the horn, gonna go for undocking.
Okay, retro, go. Fido, go. Guide, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. GNC, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go.
Capcom, we're go for undocking.
Bring you loud and clear, Houston, how are you?
Over. Roger, Eagle, undock.
Roger, how does it look?
Eagle has wings.
Roger. You're a go to continue power descent.
Roger. Altitude 40,000. Okay, all flight controllers, gonna go for landing. Retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. GNC, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go. Capcom, we're go for landing. Altitude 4200.
Houston, you're a go for landing, over.
Roger, understand. Go for landing. 3,000 feet.
You're looking great.
How you doing, Control?
We look good here, fine.
Roger, how about you, Telcom? Go. Guidance, you happy? Go. Fido.
Go. 2,000 feet. 2,000 feet.
And then we had all kinds of problems. And I found out that I almost was going to have to call an abort right off the bat because we had a velocity error. The computer was not understanding how fast it was going toward the lunar surface.
6 plus 25, throttle down. 6 plus 25, throttle down.
That velocity now reading 760.
Fortunately, we had a landing radar on the vehicle, and as it got to the point it could see the moon, it told the computer, hey, you're coming in a little fast. It sort of gentled things out. I thought, boy, this is our big problem for the day. 30 seconds later, I hear this ominous program alarm, 1201.
1201. Program alarm. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm.
1201 alarm.
And all of a sudden an alarm comes on and it says program alarm. Well, what does that mean? We don't know. We look at the numbers and it says some numbers. Now those numbers are in a checklist that's somewhere over here, but we didn't feel we had the time, so we immediately asked the ground controllers in Houston what was the meaning of that program alarm.
Buzz said, we got a 1201 alarm or 1202, whatever it was. My heart sank. I said, what is he talking about, 1202? I didn't have the foggiest clue, and I said, uh-oh.
Houston, give us a reading on the 1202 program alarm.
Which meant, do you want us to continue? Do you want us to stop? And that was my job. I was in charge of the computers. I had to figure out if we were going to continue or we were going to stop.
1202. 1202. Roger, we copy.
Looked around at everything I had. Speed was okay. Guidance commands were okay. The alarm hadn't happened for 30 seconds and didn't happen again. So I made a decision to go, and I said go as loud as I could to the flight director.
Just then, Steve Bales came up and said, "We're go on that alarm flight." And I didn't really have a clue of what the alarm meant, but I just didn't even wait for Krantz to say anything. And I said, "We're go, Eagle."
Same type, we're go, flight. Okay, we're go. We're go, same type, we're go. Eagle looking great. 750, coming down to 23. 540 feet and it's 15. 10 and 50 feet down at 4.
45 seconds later, we get another program alarm. I looked, I said, oh no, is this thing going to start coming too fast, too often? But again, it was one occurrence, single occurrence, everything else okay, speed okay, guidance commands okay. Made a decision to keep going.
Roger, we got you. We're going that alarm. Roger. They're 400 feet down at 9. 47 forward. You're looking great to us, Eagle.
Finally, I guess it was a minute or so before landing, and I'd given this rambling conversation, and Deke reached over and punched me in the side gently and said, "Charlie, shut up and let them land."
200 feet, 4.5 down, 5.5 down, 15 forward, 60 seconds.
Both of us heard the call out of 60 seconds, and we said, okay, that's expected. We didn't expect to have landed before the 60 seconds, but we thought we might have been on the ground before we got 30 seconds. So when we heard 30 seconds, by that time the low-level light had already come on. We knew that we had to get on the ground shortly, and there wasn't any point of my telling Neil that because I knew he knew that too.
Everybody was holding their breath. You could hear a pin drop in mission control. I mean, it was dead silence. The tension was so thick you could feel like you could carve a piece out with the knife, and because we were running out of gas.
Lights on. 100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. Okay, 75 feet. Guys looking good, down a half. 6 forward. 30 seconds. Lights on. Forward. Forward. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. 413 is in. We copy you down, Eagle.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Roger, Eagle, and you are safe for T1. Over. Eagle, you are safe for T1. Roger. And we're safe for T1. Roger.
I remember just sort of leaning over and patting Neil on the back, and I don't remember whether I winked or not, but we looked at each other and smiled, and we sort of said to each other, we finally made it, or we did make it successfully, and congratulate each other.
Special announcement. You will be happy to know that Apollo 11 has landed safely.
The announcer broke into that to say that Neil Armstrong had just landed on the moon. There were about, I think, 53,000 people in the stands that day, and they all stood up without being asked, and someone started singing "America the Beautiful," and everyone cried. It was an unforgettable moment. To this day, it's an unforgettable moment.
Go! Ha toccato! Toccato il suo lunare.
why you came here to watch this?
I have no TV of my own, but it was also wanting to be part of humanity at a moment like this.
What did you think when you watched it?
How wondrous God was to let us go so far, and so safely and so well. And I'm so proud to be an American.
I think it's disgusting. It's a pity they haven't got something else to do.
You're not excited about this trip at all?
Not excited at all, no. Be better if they'd done something for the old ones instead of doing this.
If they do it... Oh, here comes Mrs. Armstrong out of her home. Let's go to Texas.
Thank you very much.
Moment of your life, isn't it? Touchdown.
No, when I was married, that was the greatest moment of my life.
Do you have any inkling what he's going to say? He wouldn't tell us when he steps out on the moon.
No, I have no idea what he's going to say, but whatever he says, I'm sure it will be worthwhile.
Armstrong must be beginning that very cumbersome and difficult act of getting down on his stomach to go out feet first. At most, unless he really takes his time, it should be no more than a minute and a half to 2 minutes from now.
Just before 4 a.m. on the 21st of July, British audiences joined 600 million people around the world to watch Neil Armstrong take the first steps on the moon.
Here it goes. Here goes the mesa with a television camera on it. There is Armstrong.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. Okay, I just checked getting back up to that first step. It's a pretty good little jump. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The limb footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches.
We didn't put that much significance on the first words on the moon. Obviously, we were wrong. The world wanted to know what we were going to say.
Yeah, I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I thought, I wonder if Armstrong understands what he's done today. Then I thought, a man who is as smart, intelligent, and as trained as he is to be an astronaut obviously knows what he's done and how he will be remembered by history. Yes, he did know. And I think that what he said in his understated way is going to be around as long as language is around.
If it had been up to me to say the most important words of the mission in retrospect instead of Neil, and if I'd known that they were going to end up being that important, I certainly would have consulted the best advice that I could possibly have gotten, and it would have been my business between me and that person, and I would have adjusted whatever it is, and it would have become my words. If that's what Neil did, fine. If he dreamed them up himself, then he did a marvelous job, because I think they were very appropriate things to say.
Tell me if you got a picture, Houston. Well, you got a beautiful picture, Neil. Okay, I'm going to move it. Okay, here's another good one.
As soon as we landed on the moon and had a chance to look out my window and then his window and then, whatever else we could sort of crane our necks around and see where we were, there wasn't much to see. I mean, there were a few isolated boulders and a few undulating craters of smoothed over depressions in the ground, but there certainly wasn't anything remarkable about the surface.
And I want to know if you can see an angular rock in the foreground. Roger, we have a large angular rock in the foreground, and looks like a much smaller rock a couple of inches to the left of it. Over. The surface is fine and powdery. I can pick it up loosely with my toe.
While Buzz Aldrin prepared to climb down to join his fellow astronaut, Armstrong collected a sample of lunar dust in case the mission had to be aborted early.
We didn't know what the porosity of the moon was. You know, there was many theories that it was dust, many feet thick, and that we might settle right through. And if you remember, the bottom step was quite a ways off the ground, and there was a lot of argument about how high should the bottom step of the lunar excursion module be in case it sunk down in the dust.
Okay, I'm going to leave that 1 foot up there, and there you go. Okay, now I think I'll do the same. A little more. About another inch. There, you got it? That's a good step. Yep. About a 3-footer. Beautiful view. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation. Yeah, radio loud and clear. How's it going? Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. I believe they're setting up the flag now. Great.
We requisitioned a flag from the stockroom down at Johnson Space Center, and the price on it was $5.50. Standard 3-by-5 foot American flag, nylon.
Yes, indeed. They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar surface.
You could extend it tightly to the end and have a rather stiff-looking flag, artificial-looking, or you could back it up about 3 or 4 inches and put a ripple in the flag. And once we achieved that, we realized that's what we want. That looks like it's flying on the moon, and it did.
Tranquility Base, this is Houston. Could we get both of you on the camera for a minute, please? Neil and Buzz, the President of the United States is in his office now and would like to say a few words to you. Over. That would be an honor. Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure they too join with America in recognizing what an immense feat this is. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one. One in their pride in what you have done.
Nixon was still a new president. He had been in office for only about 6 months, but he was a very controversial figure. And people took very great sides. Nobody loved him very much. A lot of people hated him. And he wanted so much to be liked, I think. And here was something that was non-controversial. And he grabbed hold of it and milked it like it was a Holstein cow.
This certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. And thank you very much, and I look forward, all of us look forward to seeing you on the Hornet on Thursday. Look forward to that very much, sir.
I was driving home, really, and just realized, man, we did it. And it was a great feeling. And to have been a part of that historic moment in human history was a humbling experience for me.
You do have to be rather careful. Sometimes it takes about 2 or 3 paces to make sure that you've got your feet underneath you.
If there's such a thing as pure joy in this world at achieving some goal, and you could take the purest of the pure joy and distill this thing and say, this is what happiness is about. This is how exquisite it could be. Just being there was something, much less doing something.
Your whole body bursts with passion at a thing like that. And that's the way I felt. I was, if I could have climbed into the TV set, I would have done so. I'm willing to predict to you that 200 years from now, 500 years from now, 10,000 years from now, the people of the future will look back and say, in July of 1969 was the greatest month and the greatest day in the history of mankind. It will never change, because on that day, on that evening, on that morning, mankind freed themselves from gravity. We've been clinging here on this planet for millions of years and hoping someday to reach the moon. We dreamt about it when we were living in caves. We couldn't articulate it, but we looked up and said, what is that? What is that? And finally, we broke free, and the spirit of mankind soared into space on that night, and it will never stop soaring.
Port stage, engine arm ascent, proceed. Beautiful. 26, 36 feet per second up.
As they blasted off to rejoin Collins, they left behind the flag, a plaque, and the remains of the lunar module. They took with them 20 pounds of lunar rocks.
There may be a few regrets that I have in my life, and now's not the time to go into all of them, but one of them would be that if I did it again, I think I would be tempted very strongly to look out the window a lot more than I did during the mission. It would have been nice to have changed the roles where I could have been looking out the window all the time and controlling the spacecraft to land. That's just not the way it was scheduled to be. But I would say the next time, if I did have a chance to do it, I would probably try and sneak a look out the window just to be able to keep that in my mind for the rest of my life.
After 21 hours and 36 minutes on the moon, a perfect liftoff, and the astronauts are now in lunar orbit, ready to join for the journey home.
Personally, and reflecting the events of the past several days, a verse from the Psalms comes to mind to me. When I consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? We'd like to give a special thanks to all those Americans who built those spacecraft, and to all the other people that are listening and watching tonight. God bless you. Good night from Apollo 11.
Apollo program was the first thing that showed that it worked. In other words, it was like a baby crawling. It wasn't even a step. It was just a crawl. Neil Armstrong said that was the step for mankind there. It wasn't a step. That was just a crawl. I think that someday the salvation of mankind may rest in space.
I believe the entire environmental program, the movement, really got the stimulus from moving away from Earth and seeing Earth as a beautiful blue sphere, and yet looking at everything else we saw out there and seeing it barren and desolate and just devoid of all life. And here is this only sphere that we know of where humans can survive, and we better do something to take care of it.
So America has been to the moon and back safely and successfully. And we think perhaps in the process rediscovered itself and discovered that it can do anything it sets out to do. On the moon, to the planets, or in its own cities, in our own cities. Apollo 12 lies ahead in November. A new goal and new dangers as well as new rewards. And people who can and will do all that has to be done when they know.
After 8 days and 8 nights, squeezed into a spacecraft, The astronauts returned to a further 2.5 weeks confinement and quarantine.
Gee, you look great. You feel as good as you look?
Feel great. Feel just perfect, Mr. President.
Yeah. I was thinking, as you know, as you came down, and we knew it was a success, and it had only been 8 days, just a week, a long week, that this is the greatest week in the history of the world since the creation. Because as a result of what happened in this week, the world is bigger, infinitely, and we just thank you for that.
After the Apollo 11 mission, there was still great residual interest in Apollo 12. Apollo 13, which was the one that they had to abort on the way to the moon, was a sort of a shock therapy to get people a little more interested. 14, they started doing ridiculous things like Alan Shepard hitting a golf ball. And by the time 17 was flown, and we finally got a geologist up there to tell us what everybody else had told us, that the moon is a cold and lonely place except when it's hot and lonely. What did we do for an encore after that? We did nothing, and rightly so.
I thought at the time that life as we had known it had begun to change, that this really was a new era for mankind, that space was a new ocean, as we used to say, and we would sail upon it, and that we would send men to the planets, and we'd learn to live and operate in space. Well, I read now high school textbooks, college textbooks, and I find a paragraph that says in 1969 Neil Armstrong was the first person to land on the moon. And then they go into something like the change in the National Labor Relations Act.
One day down in Houston, I was driving from my hotel over to the Space Center, and a little dog started chasing my car. And just because my mind works in crazy ways, I slowed down and stopped, and what's this dog going to do if he catches this thing? And I watched in the rearview mirror. The dog came stalking over very carefully, sniffed the tire, marked it territorially, turned around and walked away. And at the end of the Apollo program, I thought, that is what we have done. We caught the moon, we peed on it, and we left.
Find out what happened when the astronauts came down to Earth tomorrow at 9:30 here on BBC Two.